Buddy, Jimmy Smith, post Thanksgiving. Of course, out of town for the holiday, just got back. So, anyway, now I'm at my computer. I'm going to talk a little bit about Conor McGregor versus Cowboy Cerrone, the fight that was just announced. Obviously, I'll do a full card breakdown when it gets a lot closer. I just want to give my initial thoughts on the main event itself. Ariel Helwani, I read the headline, wasn't able to read the article yet. Talked about this being the perfect fight, comeback fight for Conor McGregor, being Cowboy Cerrone. I happen to agree. I know he took some heat for that, but here's why. You have to look at it from the UFC's point of view. So, for Conor McGregor to come back, you need to check off a few boxes. Number one, it needs to be a winnable fight for Conor McGregor. Yes, he's a superstar. Yes, he generates a ton of pay-per-view buys. Blah, 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 blah. He needs to win. He needs to have a winnable fight. I'm not guaranteeing he beats Cowboy Cerrone, but you can't have him rematch Khabib. Khabib blows him away again, and then you're stuck with a fighter that you're always pointing out hasn't won in the UFC since November 2016. So he needed to have a winnable fight. That's criteria number one. Criteria number two is it has to be a name that keeps him in title contention. Now, we can argue all day, and I'm sure you will argue in the comment section, whether or not a win over Cowboy Cerrone puts him in title contention. But if he blows Cowboy away, will that put him in title contention at 155? Now, I will talk about the weight class in a minute, but a standout, dominating victory over Cowboy Cerrone to some people will put him in that air of a title shot at 55. Maybe 170, but I disagree with that completely. So it's a big enough name that a win will keep him in that title contention. Number three, it has to be a big enough name that it can be a standalone pay-per-view. If you look at that criteria at 155 pounds, and yes, this fight's at 170, but Cowboy is not a natural 170 pounder. Cowboy is the only one that really checks off all the boxes. It's hard to find a winnable fight for Conor McGregor at 155 pounds against an elite fighter that will keep him in title contention that's a standalone pay-per-view. Hard to find. It's full of murderers, and the UFC cannot afford for Conor McGregor to come back and lose again. So, that being said, this was a great choice. I'm surprised they didn't do it. One of the surprising things about this is this fight was in the air, a year and a half ago, and they nixed it. Nothing's really changed except Cowboys lost to Tony Ferguson. So maybe it looks a little bit more beatable. So, all right, fine, now we'll put it together where Cowboy looks a little bit more beatable. But yeah, this was a good fight, I thought, a year ago when they first talked about it. This name made a lot of sense, and now we're finally getting it, which is good. Now, the fight itself, there are two ways to look at it, to me, the tangibles and the intangibles. And to me, they all favor Conor McGregor. Not that Cowboy can't win, but follow my logic here. First, let's go with the tangibles, the tactical stuff, the physical stuff. Cowboy Cerrone has always had trouble with accurate, tactical strikers who were a little bit unorthodox. He's always had trouble with that. 155 and 170. If you stand and bang in a comparatively orthodox fashion with Cowboy Cerrone, even if you're bigger than him, even if it's at welterweight, whatever, he does very well in those fights, right? Matt Brown did well against Robbie Lawler, lost to Robbie Lawler, but a bigger, stronger guy who was pretty orthodox. Cowboy has no problem staying in there and banging. Yancy Medeiros, all day. Rick Story, all day. If you have a comparatively orthodox style, meaning traditional in any sense, basic kickboxing, and you want to stand and bang and brawl, even if you're a lot bigger than him, he generally does well with that style. The tricky, slick, unorthodox fighters who are accurate, who have good tactical awareness, have always given him trouble. Pettis, Masvidal, those are the guys who have always beaten him. Tony Ferguson. And Conor fits much more into that mold than he does in the Robbie Lawler, Matt Brown, Rick Story category. Yancy Medeiros, he doesn't fight like that. He doesn't step forward and, hey, bro, let's bang. He doesn't fight like that. He's much more tactical, accurate, precise, and that's always been his kryptonite. Always. So, anyway, that's why all of these things, to me, favor, right now, Conor McGregor on the tactical side. Then there are the intangibles. And there are two big categories I think Conor McGregor has an advantage. Number one is this will get a lot of media hype. There'll be a lot of attention on this, a lot of press conferences. Conor McGregor thrives in that environment. He loves that. He loves, hey, let's talk about this and pre-fight. All the cameras focus on me, all the questions from the reporters. Now, Cowboy Cerrone is good at these things. He's not inarticulate. He's not a stupid guy. He answers questions well, but it takes energy from him. The best description I've ever heard of extroverts and introverts is an extrovert gets energy from other people. They get energized by being in a crowd. They like being around people. An introvert, it costs them energy being around another person or a group of people. Not that they can't do it. Not that they can't go through the press conference and sound good and all these things, but it doesn't amp them up. I would put Cowboy Cerrone definitely in that introvert category for the sake of this discussion. Meaning all this press conference and stuff, he'll do well at them. Conor will bask in it. He loves that stuff. It energizes him. He loves all the attention on him and the trash talk and all these things. He does very well in that environment. Combined with that, I was talking to one of Cowboy Cerrone's old training partners over at Jackson Wink, and he told me, he likes being friends with the guys he fights. And when they're not friends, they don't want to be friends, it messes with him. And we saw that the most clear example of that was the Diaz fight. The double bird and all this stuff didn't do well at all with that. He just mentally wasn't in the fight from the beginning. I heard some behind-the-scenes stories about Pettis, that Pettis did not want to be friends and had a little personal beef with the guy, and it threw Cowboy off, and he didn't look good at all in that fight. So Conor's not going to want to be friends. And Conor knows that if he can get in Cowboy's head and make it personal, Cowboy doesn't like that, or at least he doesn't thrive in that environment, which I think McGregor will feast on in that regard. Other half of the intangible side of it, which sucks, but it's true, and I got to say it, Cowboy has always underperformed in fights like this. Big career-defining title implications, where are you in the lightweight history or the welterweight history and all that stuff. That's where Cowboy has his worst performances. I've said in previous breakdowns that if you put Cowboy Cerrone main event in fight nights for the rest of his career, he'll win until he gets too old to do it anymore. It's big lights, big fight, big name, a lot on the line, a lot of pressure. He tends to underperform, and that's what this is going to be. A big fight, big lights, big name. The winner, we'll talk about whether or not be in title contention and all this stuff, but it would be a big step forward for Cowboy to win this fight. And under those circumstances, he's never done well. And when he fought Tony Ferguson, I made the emotional pick of Cowboy Cerrone beating Ferguson. Part of it was, God, he's got to get over this hump sometime. I think he'll do it this time. I was wrong. But I'm rooting for the guy to get over that hump and beat that big name and really get over it. His worst fights tend to be when there's the most on the line, and a lot will be on the line in this fight. So all the tangibles and intangibles, to me, favor Conor McGregor. Now, the one big intangible that favors Cowboy Cerrone is long time off. He's had a long time off. He's coming off a loss. So, and he has a million out-of-octagon distractions, which I'll get to in a second. But, he may just be too distracted to have a good camp. He may have some ring rust coming off such a long layoff, things like this. So there are X factors in terms of how good his training is going to be. But if his training's sharp and the time off doesn't take a lot out of him, and this is a guy who's always distracted by something outside the octagon, be it slinging whiskey or getting in trouble or whatever the deal is, at least he's used to operating in that capacity. I don't think it's going to affect Conor that much. And also, he seems to thrive on chaos. Some fighters love that. Mike Tyson did some of his best work while everything was collapsing around him. Robin Givens is leaving him and he's knocking everybody out. Some fighters thrive on it. So Conor, to me, seems to be one of those guys. So I don't know if I expect a big change in Conor McGregor with all he's got going on outside the octagon. Speaking of that, the sexual assault charges in Ireland, should the UFC have booked this fight or not? The UFC, with the dolly throwing incident, set the precedent of when it's outside the octagon, it is not our problem. We have nothing to do with that. Remember, when Conor McGregor threw the dolly at the bus, that was a UFC event. That bus was full of UFC fighters and employees. And the UFC did zero. No fine, no suspension. They let the NYPD handle it. That's not our problem. That was the big precedent setter, right? That set the precedent. He can do whatever he wants outside the octagon. He gets arrested. He gets convicted. That's not our problem. Has nothing to do with us. We independently will not have any to do with that. Once I saw that, I knew that there was nothing he could do outside the octagon that would make the UFC hesitate to push him or anything like that. And it was obvious. I mean, it was an obvious precedent of that's not our problem. And remember, that was a UFC event, and every moment of it was captured by UFC cameras. They can say, quite honestly, look, we don't know what he did in Ireland. That's not our problem. We're not judge and jury. This was an incident that they had on camera. They know exactly what he did. They saw it, and they chose to do zero. Now, you can argue all day whether they should have done something or should not have done something, but it sets the precedent of Conor McGregor, as long as he's outside of the octagon, not our problem. So I'm not surprised at all they made this decision at all. There's a little bit of risk to it. I'm sure their attorneys know the timeline of what's going to happen in Ireland, meaning what you don't want is we book a fight January 18th and they drag him back to Ireland in handcuffs to face some kind of accusation. Now, I don't know how the legal system works over there in Ireland and how that would affect a promotion in the United States, meaning, yeah, they can come get him. They can cancel his passport and go, you can't leave the country or something like that. They must know none of that can happen, right? The only way they book this is if they're sure the legal problems he's facing won't cause him to miss the fight. And they have a dozen attorneys looking into that kind of stuff. That's what they do. So they booked this on January 18th. They're certain that the legal problems he's right now facing won't prevent him from fighting. Now, you could argue morally it shouldn't matter. He shouldn't be allowed to do that. Fine. But they set the precedent earlier that they're not going to do that. That's not their problem. So that doesn't surprise me at all. Now, it being at 170 pounds is a little confusing for a couple of reasons. Number one, I don't think there is anybody at the elite level at 170 pounds, a natural 170 pounder, right? So this is taking place at 170 pounds. Cowboy is a tweener. He's not a natural 170 pounder. He's not welterweight sized. Those guys at the top at 170 pounds, I don't think Conor can touch him. You see what Khabib did to him? Well, it only gets worse when it's Kamaru Usman, Colby Covington, Tyron Woodley. He cannot beat those guys, I don't think. He doesn't have the power to knock them out. He doesn't have the takedown defense to stop their takedown. He can't beat their ground and pound. He can't submit him. So I don't see 170 pounds as a great fit for him. I know there's talk of, well, if he wins this, maybe he gets a title shot at 170. I don't think he beats any of those guys. I don't think stylistically any of those guys are good matchups for him. The elite at 170 are too big, too strong, and they wrestle too well. Hey, Penny. Hi, sweetie. So the issue for me is I don't think it sets him up for a title shot at 170. I think it sets him up for a BMF fight with Masvidal. That makes a lot of money. He's not a natural 170 pounder, so he's certainly beatable for Conor. He has a style that's much more appealing for Conor. Not wrestling centric, more of a stand and trade kind of guy, a lot of boxing. So what I think 170 does for him is not set him up for a title shot at welterweight, which I don't think A, he deserves, and B, he can win. It does maybe set him up for a fight with Jorge Masvidal. So, for argument's sake, let's say he beats Cowboy, then he gets a shot at Masvidal. He beats Masvidal. Then you could see, okay, I'll go to 55 and see if I can beat Khabib. Now, there's much more sell behind that. There's much more enthusiasm for that fight should he beat Cowboy and then Masvidal. Now, do I think he beats Khabib? No, I think Khabib is a stylistic nightmare for him right now. In a year, being much of a difference. So, anyway, that's what I think 170 sets him up for, is a fight with Masvidal. And should he get past those two, then I could see a rematch with Khabib. And win or lose, he'll make a ton of money. So those are my initial thoughts. I will do a breakdown on the entire card the week of January 18th and figure it all out. These are just my initial thoughts. Hope everybody had a happy Thanksgiving and enjoy. And from personal experience, keep the people close to you close.